Welcome to the episode. Today we're going to spend some time with a concept that has become very influential in business, technology, education, and innovation more broadly. Design thinking. You may already have heard the phrase before. It shows up in conversations about product development, service improvement, digital transformation, entrepreneurship, and even public sector change. Sometimes it is presented as a method, sometimes as a mindset, and sometimes almost as a magic formula for innovation. What I want to do in this episode is slow that down a little and make it practical. What is design thinking really about? Why has it become so popular? And how can we understand it in a way that is useful rather than just fashionable? A good place to start is with the word design. Many people hear design and immediately think about appearance. They think of colors, logos, interfaces, shapes, and visual style. That is part of design, but design thinking is much broader than aesthetics. In this context, design is about intentionally shaping solutions for human use. It is about creating something that works for people in a real context. That something might be a physical product, but it could just as easily be a digital service, a healthcare process, a course design, an internal workflow, or a customer journey. Design thinking is therefore less about making things look nice and more about making things useful, usable, meaningful, and viable. At its core, design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving. That phrase, human-centered, is important. It means that instead of beginning with the technology we have, or the organizational structure we already know, or the assumptions we carry from the past, we begin with people. We try to understand their needs, frustrations, motivations, behaviors, and goals. We look at what they say, but also what they actually do. We explore not just the problem as it is stated, but the problem as it is lived. This is one reason design thinking became so attractive in organizations. Many organizations are very good at solving the wrong problem efficiently. They optimize processes, develop features, and deliver outputs, but later discover that users did not really need those things, or could not use them, or did not value them enough. Design thinking tries to reduce that risk. It encourages us to step out of the conference room, out of the spreadsheet, out of the abstract planning exercise, and into the lived reality of the people we are designing for. You can think of design thinking as a response to a common pattern in organizations. A team sees a problem, quickly jumps to a solution, invests time and money in building it, and only afterwards asks whether it really solved the right issue. Design thinking pushes back against that instinct. It says, before we lock into solutions, let us explore the problem space more deeply. Let us understand the user. Let us test assumptions early. Let us learn cheaply before we build expensively. Another reason the approach became influential is that many contemporary problems are messy. They do not have one clear cause or one correct answer. Improving a university course, redesigning a patient intake process, creating a better public transport app, or building a digital platform for remote collaboration are all examples of problems that involve multiple stakeholders, conflicting needs, limited resources, and changing conditions. These are not purely technical challenges. They are socio-technical challenges. Human behavior matters. Context matters. Emotions matter. Trade-offs matter. Design thinking is especially useful in those situations because it accepts ambiguity rather than pretending everything can be fully specified from the beginning. Now, when people describe design thinking, they often refer to a set of phases. Different models use slightly different words, But the most common sequence includes empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. It is tempting to think of these as a neat linear process. First, do empathy, then define, then ideate, and so on. In practice, it is usually more iterative than that. Teams move back and forth. They learn something during testing that sends them back to redefining the problem. They discover during prototyping that their original insights were incomplete. So it is better to think of these phases as activities that structure learning, rather than as rigid steps in a straight line. Let's start with empathy. Empathy in design thinking does not mean simply being nice or emotionally identifying with someone in a vague sense. It means making a serious effort to understand another person's experience from their point of view. That often involves observation, interviews, shadowing, contextual inquiry, and other methods that reveal how people behave in real situations. Suppose a university wants to improve the student experience in online learning. It might be tempting to start by adding new tools or features to the learning platform. But a design thinking approach would first ask, what do students actually struggle with? Is the issue unclear instructions, lack of feedback, digital overload, isolation, poor structure, or conflicting expectations between work and study? Until we understand that, any solution might be premature. Empathy also reminds us that people are often not fully aware of their own needs, or at least they do not always express them in a simple and direct way. If you ask users what they want, they may describe a feature. But the deeper issue might be a need for clarity, control, trust, speed, confidence, or reduced anxiety. Good design thinking looks beneath surface requests. It tries to uncover the underlying need. After empathy comes defining the problem. This is a surprisingly difficult stage because the way a problem is framed strongly influences the kinds of solutions that become visible. If we define a problem too narrowly, we may miss better opportunities. If we define it too broadly, it becomes impossible to act. For example, students are unhappy is too vague. We need a better learning management system, maybe too solution-oriented. A stronger definition might be something like, working professionals in an online master's program struggle to keep track of weekly priorities because course information is distributed across multiple channels and presented inconsistently. That statement is still imperfect, but it is more actionable and more human-centered. It focuses on a specific group, a real challenge, and a contextual cause. This stage matters because many failed innovations are not failures of execution. They are failures of framing. A team may be highly competent, disciplined, and hardworking, yet still fail because it solved a less important problem or misunderstood the actual pain point. Design thinking places unusual emphasis on problem framing, because innovation is not just about creating answers. It is about asking better questions. Then comes ideation. This is the part many people think of first because it sounds creative and energetic. Brainstorming, sketching, generating ideas, exploring alternatives. And yes, ideation is important. But in design thinking, ideation works best when it is grounded in the earlier empathy and definition work. Otherwise, it becomes just a flood of random ideas. Good ideation aims for both breadth and relevance. The point is not to find the perfect idea immediately. The point is to create enough options that the team can explore different directions before converging too early. This stage also benefits from diversity. Different backgrounds, disciplines, and perspectives often produce better idea generation because they challenge shared assumptions. An engineer may see feasibility issues. A teacher may see learning implications. A service designer may see friction points in the user journey. A manager may see organizational barriers. When those perspectives interact well, ideation becomes richer. One of the quiet strengths of design thinking is that it treats ideas as provisional. In many traditional environments, people become attached to ideas too quickly. An idea becomes associated with status, ownership, or identity. Once that happens, criticism feels personal. Design thinking tries to loosen that attachment. It encourages teams to think in terms of experiments rather than declarations. Instead of saying, "Det idag here, this is the solution," the team says, "This is one possible direction worth exploring." That small shift can make collaboration more honest and more productive. After ideation comes prototyping. This is where design thinking becomes especially powerful because it turns thinking into something tangible. A prototype is not the final product. It is a representation of an idea that allows us to explore, communicate, and learn. It might be a sketch, a storyboard, a clickable mock-up, a role play, a paper model, a pilot process, or a rough service simulation. The key point is that prototypes make ideas testable. Why is that so important? Because ideas will often sound convincing when they remain abstract. The moment you try to make them concrete, weaknesses appear. Maybe the workflow is confusing, maybe the service requires too many steps. Maybe the user must know information they do not actually have. Maybe the proposed feature solves one problem but creates two others. Prototypes reveal that earlier, which is exactly what we want. There is a common misunderstanding that prototyping is only for designers or engineers or only for products. Not at all. If you are redesigning an onboarding process in a public agency, you can prototype the sequence of interactions. If you are developing a new teaching format, you can prototype the learning activity. If you are improving a healthcare service, you can prototype the patient journey. Prototyping is really about externalizing an idea quickly enough that others can react to it. And then we come to testing. In design thinking, testing is not just quality control at the end, it is learning. We put something in front of users, stakeholders, or participants and observe what happens. Do they understand it? Can they use it? Does it reduce friction? Does it address the need we thought it would address? What surprises emerge? What assumptions are challenged? This emphasis on learning is one of the healthiest aspects of design thinking. It normalizes the idea that early versions will be incomplete and that feedback is not a threat, but a resource. In many organizations, people avoid exposing unfinished work because they fear criticism. Design thinking tries to create the opposite culture. Show the work early, learn early, adapt early. That way, failure becomes smaller, cheaper, and more informative. Now, if all of this sounds very reasonable, you might ask, why is it special? Have people not always observed users, generated ideas, and tested prototypes? To some extent, yes. Many of these practices existed long before the phrase design thinking became popular. What the term did was package them into a recognizable and transferable approach, especially for people outside traditional design fields. It helped managers, educators, engineers, and entrepreneurs adopt design-oriented ways of working. It made the logic of human-centered innovation more visible. At the same time, it is worth being a little critical. Design thinking is useful, but it is not a miracle cure. One limitation is that it can become superficial if it is reduced to a workshop format. Some organizations run a 2-hour brainstorming session with sticky notes and call it design thinking. That may be energizing, but without genuine user research, thoughtful synthesis, and real testing, it becomes performative rather than transformative. The visual style of design thinking is not the same as the substance of it. Another limitation is that human-centered design still exists inside broader systems. You may design a better service interaction, but if the organization lacks resources, leadership support, or structural flexibility, the solution may not survive. In other words, empathy and creativity are important, but implementation capability matters too. A brilliant prototype that cannot be adopted operationally has limited value. That is why many people connect design thinking to broader concerns such as strategy, change management, and organizational culture. There is also a tension between desirability, feasibility, and viability. This is often described as three overlapping dimensions. Desirability asks whether people want or need the solution. Feasibility asks whether it can actually be built or delivered. Viability asks whether it can be sustained economically or organizationally. Design thinking often starts from desirability because so many organizations neglect that dimension. But the best solutions usually sit at the intersection of all three. Something deeply desirable but impossible to deliver will fail. Something feasible and viable that nobody cares about will also fail. Let's make this more concrete with an example. Imagine a city wants to improve access to mental health support for university students. A traditional approach might begin by reviewing service capacity, existing systems, and administrative processes, then producing a set of procedural improvements. A design thinking approach would likely begin by asking students about their experience. How do they recognize they need help? What stops them from seeking support? How do they find information? Where does the process feel confusing, slow, or intimidating? Perhaps the real issue is not simply lack of services, but the emotional difficulty of initiating contact, combined with fragmented information and long uncertainty before the first response. That insight could lead to solutions such as a more supportive first contact experience, clearer pathways, peer support integration, or better follow-up communication. Notice what happened there. The problem shifted from optimized counseling administration to reduce the barriers students face when trying to access help. That reframing can change everything. Or, take a business example. A company believes its customers want more features in a software product. Through observation and interviews, the team discovers that customers are actually overwhelmed by complexity. What they want is not more functionality, but more confidence that they're using the right functionality at the right time. The solution may therefore involve simplification, guidance, onboarding, and trust building rather than expansion. Again, the key value of design thinking is not just generating ideas, it is uncovering the real need. There is also an important mindset embedded in the approach. Design thinking values curiosity over certainty, experimentation over assumption, and iteration over perfection. That can be difficult in environments that reward immediate answers and polished plans. Many professionals are trained to appear confident, decisive, and correct. Design thinking asks for a different kind of strength, the ability to say, "We do not fully understand this yet, so let us investigate," or "We have a promising direction, but let us test it before committing heavily." That is not weakness. In complex problem solving, that is maturity. Another interesting aspect is that design thinking often works well in multidisciplinary teams because it creates shared objects for discussion. Instead of arguing in the abstract, people can react to interview findings, journey maps, problem statements, sketches, and prototypes. Those artifacts become a common language between people who otherwise think very differently. An IT specialist, a policy analyst, a teacher, and a service manager may not initially approach problems in the same way, but they can all discuss a user journey or react to a prototype. In that sense, design thinking also functions as a collaboration framework. It is also worth saying that design thinking is not anti-analysis. Sometimes people create a false contrast between analytical thinking and design thinking, as if one is rigorous and the other is creative. In reality, the best design thinking includes both. It involves interpretation, synthesis, prioritization, evidence gathering, and structured evaluation. The difference is that it broadens what counts as relevant evidence. It includes human experience, observed behavior, emotional friction, and contextual detail alongside data, process maps, and technical constraints. For educators, design thinking can be especially interesting because learning environments are full of design problems. How do we create assignments that genuinely engage students? How do we reduce confusion without removing intellectual challenge? How do we design feedback so that students can actually act on it? How do we support diverse learners with different backgrounds and motivations? These are not merely administrative questions. They are human-centered design questions. A design thinking lens can help educators move beyond assumptions and examine the student experience more carefully. For leaders, design thinking can be valuable because it shifts organizational conversations from internal convenience toward external value. It asks not just what the organization can deliver, but what people actually need from it. That is crucial in times of digital transformation, when organizations can become fascinated by tools, platforms, and automation without sufficiently asking whether the resulting experience is better for users, citizens, customers, or employees. At the same time, leaders should be careful not to instrumentalize design thinking too narrowly. If it becomes just another management slogan, people will quickly lose trust in it. The approach works best when leaders genuinely support exploration, allow some ambiguity early on, and accept that meaningful innovation requires learning. If every project is judged only by short-term efficiency metrics from day one, design thinking will struggle because early exploration sometimes looks slower before it becomes smarter. So if you are new to design thinking, how should you begin? Probably not by memorizing a model. Start by changing a few habits. Spend more time with users before deciding on a solution. Ask open questions. Observe real situations. Reframe problems in human-centered terms. Generate multiple options before converging. Build small prototypes early. Test with humility. Treat feedback as learning. Those habits, even in simple form, already move you toward design thinking. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: design thinking is not primarily about producing innovation theater. It is about disciplined empathy and practical learning. It is creative, yes, but not creativity for its own sake. It is structured, but not rigid. It is user-focused, but not naive about constraints. When practiced well, it helps teams discover what matters, make ideas tangible, and improve solutions through iteration. So, when you hear the term design thinking, try not to hear hype. Hear a challenge instead, a challenge to look more closely at human experience, a challenge to question your first framing of the problem, a challenge to test before committing, a challenge to design with people in mind, rather than simply around organizational assumptions. In a world full of complexity, change, and uncertainty, that is a very valuable way to think. And that is where we will leave it for today. Design thinking is not the only approach to innovation, and it certainly does not solve everything, but it gives us a very useful starting point. Understand people, define the real problem, explore possibilities, make ideas visible, and learn through testing. When those principles are taken seriously, better solutions become much more likely.